right, time for the Penn State Blitz here on PennLive. We are deep in July.
That's
August is right around the corner. I feel like I was just talking about this. August is right around the corner for Penn State football, Greg. That means camp is almost here. I can't believe our summer shot. Although we did have a good time in Chicago with the Big Ten Media Days.
Yes.
I know you did. We'll have more on that later on Second Down. But on First Down here on the Penn State Blitz on PennLive, let's talk recruiting. We've been talking a lot of recruiting in spring and summer since the blue-white game concluded. Emory Simmons is now in the fold for Penn State football. What does it mean to James Franklin in this program?
Well, I think for starters, if you were going to pick one guy that Penn State would get as a commitment out of the last bash, it's big recruiting weekend, I don't think Emory Simmons would have been it. So he's flipped twice now, starting by committing to Indiana in March, flipped to North Carolina in June, now flips to Penn State in July. So I think there's a legitimate concern that he might flip again just because he's shown the tendency to do so.
Saying he's a flip-flopper?
No, I just think that he's been looking for sort of the best opportunity, and it hasn't always come along right away. And he takes it when it comes. I think that Penn State's probably a plateau for him, though, so I do expect him to stick. 6 foot, 180-pound receiver out of North Carolina. Bob, he got rave reviews at the opening in Dallas at the end of June and start of July. So I think Penn State gets a sneaky good 3-star here. There's just a little bit concerned about what his recruitment has been to this point when it comes to whether or not he'll sign in December. I don't think he'll flip, but again, the precedent's already been set that it might be possible.
Also worth noting that you mentioned North Carolina, I believe. So that expanded Penn State recruiting footprint is continuing. James Franklin, Penn State's not typically known for reaching that far south to get a kid, but it just seems like this is going to be the way they're going to do business moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think we heard James talk in Chicago about the idea that, they're going to go wherever they have to go, especially in years that Pennsylvania is not especially good, and it's not this year. I mean, there are a few prospects, Aaron Young, the running back out of Coatesville, Joey Porter Jr., yes, the one that was related to that, Joey Porter, has an offer out of the West, but for the most part, Penn State hasn't offered too many Keystone State prospects. Keaton Ellis, the 3-star corner from State College, committed as well, but we heard him talk in Chicago about the fact that they're going to have to go different places in some years, and this is a good year, and it's an example of that.
Moving right along to Second Down on the Penn State Blitz on PennLive. We mentioned Big Ten Media Days are about a week. We've concluded about a week out. Lots to talk about with James Franklin and the players. Trace McSorley was out there. A couple of defensive backs were out there. When you look back on what you heard and saw in Chicago from Penn State, what kind of really jumps out to you? Yeah,
I mean, I think the things that really stood out most are the facts that, the obvious ones, of course. What are they going to do at linebacker? They could move around the offensive line pieces with Mennett and McGovern. But a couple of the offbeat things that we haven't much talked about is I don't think they know what they're doing at kick returner yet, Bob.
Right.
And I don't think that they yet know exactly how they're going to attack the new redshirt rule that allows a guy to play 4 games. I think we know some guys that will play. I don't think we know all of them.
Yeah, to me, a couple things that jumped out. James was pretty adamant. He is really against the Friday night game in Illinois.
Right.
They play that game in late September. I believe it's the week before the Ohio State game at home. And you could make the argument maybe that they get an extra day of prep time for the Ohio State game. James doesn't look at it that way. He's a schedule kind of guy. It's one day less prep for a road game at night. He also mentioned the fact that he believes that Friday night is for high school football, but you don't usually see James Franklin that worked up about a topic, but he clearly is not a fan of Penn State playing on Friday in the Big Ten moving forward. A couple other things just to touch on. Manny Bowen, the name Manny Bowen came up, and it was as close to a non-answer as you could get about a player. Manny Bowen would be their most experienced linebacker. He's not on the team. He was kicked off the team late last season.
Right.
His second suspension at Penn State. He could play inside or outside. James talked about linebacker depth being one of the priorities. But the way, Greg, that he answered the question about Manny Bowen and opening the door open for a return just kind of has you scratching your head about the way that he answered it, that maybe something's afoot.
Yeah, it just makes you wonder if there's not a couple more boxes left to check for him to maybe return to the team. This is much as clear, though, Bob. It's not a definite yes, but it's also not a definite no.
Yeah, and also one more thing. The freshman, I think that Penn State is really looking for to play. I think there's at least 6 guys. The names that surprised me, a couple of them we knew about: Micah Parsons, Jesse Luketa, Justin Shorter, even though he's arriving in August. Ricky Slade, even though he's arriving in August. But the 2 defensive linemen that James mentioned, P.J. Mustipher and Judge Culpepper. Culpepper is another. Those 2 both they didn't take part in spring drills.
Right.
So that just speaks to when he talks about defensive tackle depth being an issue, that maybe they didn't get as much development at that position coming out of spring as they would have liked.
Yeah, that's a big question mark going into camp. Did Antonio Shelton and Ellison Jordan not do enough, or did Penn State just get two really super good recruits that are able to play as freshmen? That's really the question they'll have to answer throughout August, and it'll define what their depth looks like in the fall.
Okay, third down here on the blitz. It's more about the recruiting.
Yes.
The Lash Bash is now in the books as well, and also, as we talk about this, there is a very prominent quarterback prospect that Penn State has in their sights that is getting ready to decide.
Right, so we're taping this on Tuesday if you're watching it Wednesday, but Michael Johnson Jr. decides on Wednesday.
Yeah.
It looks like it's going to be about a 6 p.m. Eastern time announcement. Oregon State, Penn State, a couple Florida schools, and North Carolina State in the running here. There's every indication that his visit to campus back in June more or less kind of sealed the deal for the Nittany Lions. I mean, I know they already have a quarterback in the class in Taquan Roberson. A couple of his other choices do not have a quarterback committed yet. Could that sway things in the end? It's not out of the question. But if I had to go on the record with a pick on Tuesday before he announces, it just looks like the Lions at this point, James Franklin, it looks to be in good position to finally get his wish of taking two quarterbacks in a class. He's wanted to do it since 2014. Bob, hasn't happened yet. Looks like it might this year.
Okay, now getting to fourth down, which I think is probably what has the Penn State fans excited the most, is we got a media day coming up at State College on Saturday. That means practices are going to really start, I believe, on Saturday as well for Penn State. Storylines not necessarily related to what we learned in Chicago with the media days with James Franklin, but what are your storylines? What are some things I think you think the fans should kind of be keeping a close eye on or listening to, or maybe James Franklin's going to get asked about? What are some topics that you like?
Well, I think to go back to some of the things that we touched on in Chicago, there's no question that everyone's going to be on alert for Manny Bowen to see if the linebacker shows up or if he's around or if there's any ultimatum there one way or the other. Another thing I think is, again, it'll be interesting to see what they do in the return game because there's no Saquon Barkley coming, and I thought his comments were a little bit telling. And he mentioned that he thinks that most beat writers that cover teams will be able to figure out how each school is going to attack the new kickoff rule, where you can fair catch it in between the 25 and the goal line and get it at the 25. I don't know if there's necessarily a way he's going about that, other than to think if he doesn't love his option back there, I think they're just going to fair catch it each time and take the ball to 25. So we'll see, but I'm curious to see what they line up there. And then, we talked about it. The defensive line depth is something that really is going to come into focus in a hurry come the end of August and start of September.
Well, my top storyline for camp involves Manny Bowen. I know that we've talked about it a lot, and I know technically he is not on the team, but I'm telling you, Greg, I would be surprised if he does not heard from at some point this year. I think there's a strong chance that Manny Bowen's career at Penn State is not over. I'm not going to say it's for sure, but everything I'm hearing and just the way that James Franklin answered that question that you asked him a week ago, I think there's room for Manny. I think there's a possibility Manny might return. I'm not sure where they'll play him. I'm not sure how long it'll take him to get ready because he didn't practice. He hasn't practiced or played in a while. But to me, that's the number one storyline. I'm still interested in the offensive line and the best five and the fact that James Franklin will not let go of the possibility that Michael Menet, who has not started yet at Penn State and worked almost exclusively at right guard with the first team in spring, could be the starting center, by the end of camp. That would necessitate a move by Connor McGovern back to guard, which he played in 2016. But I thought the funniest thing was he said Trace McSorley is going to have a say in that as well. How realistic is that Michael Menet might be a starting center for Penn State at some point this year? Yeah,
I think some point this year is the right way to look at it. Unfortunately, this Penn State offensive line group over the last few years had to deal with a lot of injuries. And I think even if he doesn't start the year at center, you just get a weird and sort of unsettling feeling that somebody might miss a game or two at some point, and that would cause some shuffling. I think the other thing, too, that we keep sort of gloss over it because it seems like a done deal, but I think Will Fry's Chaz Wright's a camp battle that goes all the way for the right tackle spot. You could see those guys rotate maybe. Penn State did that a little bit last year, but to me, at some point, you have to pick your five and stick with them. We'll see if Penn State does that or not.
I'll give you one more underrated storyline that I think will have a significant bearing on the season, Greg. Place kicker. Is it going to be Blake Gillikin, who's potentially a first-team All-Big Ten punter, potentially an All-American punter after 2 very strong years, or is it going to be Jake Pinniger? I think those are the candidates. They're going to have to make a decision pretty soon, I think, in camp. James was sending signals that he would prefer Blake to just concentrate on punting. But,
Right.
I mean, given how tough their schedule is, they got to be able to trust their kicker.
If I was a betting man, I think it'd be Gilligan. I do. I just think that at this point, Pinniger might earn it down the road.
Yeah.
But if you're going to have a guy that's a veteran, guy that's been around a long time and doing things very successfully, I think you put him in a position to be your punter and your field goal kicker, and you hope Pinniger or one of the walk-ons can handle kickoffs, especially with this new rule that may make kickoffs not moot, but if you get it towards the goal line each and every time, you don't got to get it in the end zone anymore to create a touchback, so you might get some break there. That would be my prediction going into the season.
All right, that is fourth down here on the Penn State Blitz. I believe it's also a wrap for this edition of the Penn State Blitz. We have some recruiting news we'll be talking about very soon with the Penn State fans, and I know you're really looking forward to training camp and to Penn State Media Day, but not as much as you looked forward to Chicago a week ago. People, the stories I could tell you about Greg Pickle that I will not tell you about, maybe direct message me on Twitter, and I'll give you some examples of this man out in Chicago, but I could tell you he had a good time, as did I. And we'll talk to you soon with some Penn State news. That's it for this edition of the Penn State Blitz on PennLive.